With great pride that we organize the UrbSim launch event today for all of you. The Urban Climate Simulator, or UrbSim in short, embodies more than 20 years of research and project work on the topic of urban climate by the Climate Impacts team at VITO, which is the largest research center on sustainability and environment in Flanders and Belgium. The UrbSim online service represents a milestone in our roadmap of the development of urban climate services, and UrbSim wants to facilitate the access to high-resolution urban climate data for any city in the world, calculated with the urban climate model URCLIM. So before I start, I would like to recall some housekeeping rules already visible on the opening slide. So if you have a question, please use the Q&A at the bottom. The Q&A is visible for everybody. So questions can be upvoted and will be answered at the end of the webinar. If after the webinar you would have more questions or you want to discuss something with us, feel free to contact us at the email shown on this slide. So now let's have a look at the agenda. So after this introduction, I will give the floor to Nicholas Jones from the World Bank. So Nicholas Jones is thematic lead for extreme heat resilience at the World Bank's Global Unit for Disaster and Climate Risk Management. Nick will briefly present how URCLIM-generated data is being used by the team. After Nick, our colleague Niels will demonstrate UrbSim and explain the different options as well as how the data can be used. Finally, Koen de Ridder, the inventor of the model, will go in more detail on the URCLIM engine, on the URCLIM model, the engine of UrbSim. So after this introduction, Nick, the floor is yours. We can't hear you, Nick.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Philippe. Thanks to the VITO team for inviting me to take part today. It's a great pleasure to share some of what we have learned in the course of several years where we have made use of URCLIM data in a number of our projects and analyses. So let me go ahead and share my screen. I think that people on this call probably need very little introduction to the motivation around measuring and modeling urban climates better. But nonetheless, I have a little starter exercise here just to get us warmed up, which we've used in several presentations. So, and forgive me if you have seen this before, but on the left is pictured an island in the year 1609. And your two questions are, what island is this? And what would have the greatest impact on local temperatures and weather, 400 years of climate change or building a city in this location? So I'll give you just a moment to think about it. The island is, of course, Manhattan in 1609, pictured thanks to a computer reconstruction by National Geographic magazine. And on the right, you see the island of Manhattan today. This imagery is just meant to introduce and dramatize the fact that the physical fabric of a city intervenes in very, very influential ways in the atmospheric processes that give rise to the weather. And particularly as more and more of the world's population congregates in cities, in dense and manufactured spaces, then really, if we're concerned with the impacts of climate change on outcomes of interest in the international development community, on economic prosperity, and on the health of populations, we need to understand the climate of cities. The heart of the matter, of course, is that if you stand in any given city location and look around you, you're surrounded by artificial man-made materials like concrete, asphalt, packed earth, and so forth. And these materials, as we know, absorb energy from the sun and radiate it back out, particularly at night, giving rise to urban effects upon the climate. So where have we found URCLIM data to be useful? I'd like to just step back a moment to try and put it in context. So if you don't mind, I'd like to introduce it using this phrase. When it comes to measuring heat in cities, we already have 200 years of innovation. And the figure I'm showing here is the first systematic measurements of urban versus rural temperatures conducted very close to where I'm sitting today in London by Luke Howard, who's known as, obviously, is known as a father in the field of urban climatology. Next, I just wanted to show another way in which urban climates have been measured over time. Thanks to Ian Stewart. This is a figure that Ian has shared in one of his publications. This is a hand-drawn map in the 1930s based on measurements taken by a thermometer carried by a car. And that this is supposedly one of the first representations of urban climates using the analogy of a heat island. Now, I introduced these two examples just to make the point that there are many different methods out there to understand the climate of cities. We can be using stationary sensors. We can be using methods like a vehicle traverse, as shown just now. Today, we can make good use of satellite imagery to quickly get an understanding of the temperature of surfaces within a city. And we can use urban climate models. And each of these methods has its pros and cons. In the past 4 or 5 years, where I work at the World Bank, we have been making use of the different methodologies where we find that we have the resources, we have the time frame, and where they can add value. So urban climate modeling, such as URBClim outputs, has distinct advantages. It is forward-looking. We can draw on scientific validation studies of the kind that have been conducted with URBClim. It is obviously more costly than using satellite imagery, which can be done very rapidly. Urban climate modeling has advantages vis-a-vis other methods, and each methodology should be picked according to the project context and the needs of the analysis. So with that, I wanted to share a couple of brief examples of where we have used URBClim data, the first one being from South Africa. Just over 3 years ago now, we initiated a program of work in South Africa in which URBClim has been instrumental. The exercise shown here involved around 100 community volunteers taking local measurements of heat stress using the instrument shown here, a wet bulb globe temperature thermometer. And we used that data to tune and validate a URBClim modeling study. This is the first time that our team encountered URBClim. And a key output is what you see here, which is a urban heat island intensity map for the neighboring cities of Johannesburg and Ekurhuleni. And what was so helpful with this particular figure is it identifies some very distinct areas of the city where average year-round temperatures are seen to be higher. And these temperatures, when you take a look at some examples, it's actually quite easy to see on the ground the physical factors that drive the temperature disparities here between very densely packed neighborhoods of the city and much more sparsely built neighborhoods with a great deal more green cover. An advantage that we have found with URBClim is it allows us to look at spatial differences, which parts of a city tend to be hotter, but it also allows us to consider what future time periods will be like. And in this case, thanks to modeling by the VITO team, we see that as we look forward towards the 2050s, the number of hot nights, for example, is likely to increase significantly, but with, again, the same geographic hotspots within the city, which actually correspond to various inequalities within the city. I wanted just to highlight in terms of making use of this type of data, It has also been enormously valuable as a way to engage local participants. This is an example of where we have organized a peer learning workshop and asked local city government officials to brainstorm how could your municipality get started to address some of the issues that came up. So where else have we used UrbSim? I'm going to quickly highlight 3 examples. The first is a study in West Athens, a municipality in Greece. This was a study where we were asked to respond fairly quickly to a client request to understand a bit more about extreme heat impacts in the present day and in future, and how different parts of the city and national government apparatus could step up their responses to it. So what we're picturing here is actually just a very simple use of GIS software to understand for some specific locations across a large metropolitan area, specifically the location of schools. If we look at the present and future day, which schools face a larger number of extremely hot days per year, and how will that distribution shift in future? Secondly, and perhaps I'll share the link for future reference, having spatially explicit information about heat stress can be helpful in the context of a more detailed modeling exercise. In this working paper for the India Climate Change and Development Report produced by my World Bank colleagues, we conducted a benefit cost analysis, and we tried to address the question, which interventions would most cost effectively reduce the health and economic losses in Indian cities in the context of mounting heat stress. And by applying various modeling approaches, including environmental public health modeling approaches, we could conclude actually that there really are some particular interventions which represent low-hanging fruit, which can quite cost-effectively bring down mortality and economic losses as a result of heat stress. Lastly, I wanted to highlight a study that we published called Unlivable, What the Urban Heat Island Effect Means for East Asia Cities, where the UrbClim outputs were really very helpful, and they feature quite prominently in one of the chapters. I have a concluding thought. So obviously I sit within a team at the World Bank, and our focus is on the developing world and low and middle income countries. And this is just really a motivator about how severe can extreme heat impacts get, and hence why is it important for us to use the best modeling tools that we can get our hands on to better understand those impacts. I'm just really quoting a study from Vecellio et al., who are based in Pennsylvania in the USA. And what they're showing in this figure is in the year 2050, under different global warming, global emission scenarios, how many hours above a theoretically unlivable heat threshold will people be experiencing. And if you see yellow is 1 day, the orange color is 1 week, and the red color is 1 month per year of heat stress that pushes the limits of human endurance. And it does show that as we progress in this century, very substantial numbers of people will be facing heat stress that poses very difficult questions for us and really underscores the urgency of addressing the issue. So that's what I wanted to share. Thanks again to the Veto team for asking me to participate, and I'm looking forward to learning more about the tool that is being launched today, which I understand is really the next iteration and the next advancement of some of the outputs that we have been able to make use of. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick, for this very interesting presentation, highlighting and giving lots of examples. For the sake of time, we're not going to open the floor to take questions, so we're going to have all the questions at the end. People can already put them in the Q&A. So I would like now to introduce the next speaker, which is Niels Soevereins. Niels, you may put on your camera, microphone. And Niels will first of all start by giving us a demonstration of the UrbSim of the URBSIM tool, and secondly, give a short presentation on how the data is being used in his activities. So Niels, go ahead.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this demonstration of the Urban Climate Simulator, or URBSIM. To request urban climate data, we first invite you to go to our website, urban-climate.eu, and then you will end up on this page. On this page, you can find information on the model that is used to generate the data, some references from previous projects where the model has been used, an overview of the different indicators that are provided as output of the model. So if we click on this, you can see an overview of the different indicators that are calculated by the model. Example is the cooling degree hours, heat wave days, lost working hours, average temperatures over the climatological timescales, urban heat island effects, and temperatures exceeding different thresholds. So we invite you before submitting any data to see which indicators will be provided at the end of your submission. And the last button you can click on is the contact button. If you need a personal request or some adaptations to the model, you can contact us and we will see what we can do for you. But let's get started by requesting data from the Urban Climate Simulator. And for this, we click on the button here at the top, Get Started. Then you will end up on this application. This application will first show a map of the world in which you can select the model domain that you want data for at 100 meter or 200 meter resolution. You can select a domain by first zooming into the area of interest, for example, like this. Or you can click and search here in the search button, in the search bar, and search for a location of preference. Let's try, for example, the city of Paris. Click here, you will see that the application will zoom in to the city of Paris. Apart from the OpenStreetMap background, it's also possible to choose a satellite image as background. And this usually helps by selecting a model, by selecting the boundaries of your city. Selecting the model domain is simple. You click at the top left part of your city and you start drawing a square, and that square will be your model domain. There are some restrictions to the size of the model domain. As you will see here, the minimum model domain is 100 square kilometers and the maximum domain is 3,600 square kilometers. To confirm your model domain, you can click again, and then you will see that the box will become green. Changing the model domain is fairly easy. You just click it again, and you can shift and draw, for example, a bigger or a smaller domain. What you will also see is that the price at the bottom right corner will change depending on your model domain. If you choose small model domain, you will see that the price will drop to a lower number. So bigger domains require more calculation time and this will also be reflected in the price. Once you have confirmed your model domain, you choose a project name, for example, the name of the city, and then you can proceed to the next screen. In this next screen, we will set the time settings of our model simulation. So our model can run for historical periods, a period that has to fall within the range of 2001 till 2023. So the model simulation period can be chosen here. You can make it bigger, the model simulation period larger, or smaller. And for climatological applications, we recommend using a time range of at least 10 years to get a good idea of the historical climate of your city. Apart from the indicators that are provided in each request, it is also possible to get the hourly spatial explicit data, the meteorological data, temperatures, wind speeds, humidity, and land surface temperatures at an hourly timescale for the period that is requested above. If you're interested in this, you can click this box. Apart from historical periods, it's also possible to get future climatological information. If you're interested also in the future of climate in your city, you can tick here a box for the time or multiple boxes for the time periods of your interest. For example, I'm interested in the middle of the century, and you can choose the emission pathway. These are the standard emission pathways from the IPCC. If you want more information on what these mean, you can click on the link here, and then you will see how global temperature will change with each of these pathways. I will select two in this case, one low-end emission scenario and a high-end emission scenario. You will see that when you select periods, more periods, a higher price will end up here. Apart from time settings, we also give you some liberty to choose some of the surface settings. So the UrbClim model has a lot of input parameters from satellite information, but we also want to provide you some options to allow for some flexibility. One of the options that we allow you is the choice of the land use dataset. And we offer three possibilities. It's the world cover dataset, the local climate zone dataset, and the Korean land cover dataset. What we recommend is, depending on your application, is to check how your city looks like, the land use of your city looks like in these three input datasets. And that can be done by clicking on this More Info button, which will guide you to a viewer of each of these three datasets. Let's see, for example, how the city of Paris looked like in world cover. So world cover has a very high spatial resolution of 10 meters, but only has one urban class, for example. If you're interested in more urban classes, then maybe the local climate zone map is a good option for you. So this is how the city of Paris looks like in the local climate zone map. You see more urban classes that are present, so more discrimination between different building types in the city, but the spatial resolution is lower, only 100 meters. The third option, the Korean land use map, also has more urban classes, but is only available over Europe. So when you select a city outside of Europe, the Korean land cover map is not available. The second option that we allow you to choose is the choice of the soil sealing dataset. The three options are a soil sealing dataset based on Landsat, one on Sentinel, and the last one is again a Copernicus product that is only available over Europe. Again, three options are, the more info buttons are available to give more information on these data sets. For each of these, or both the land use data set and the soil sealing data set, we also provide a default option, which we know that works generally well for all cities in the world. The last option that you can choose is the data projection. The projection in which we provide you the data can be EPSG 432.6 or the Mercator projection at 3857. We then proceed to the next step. We only need some personal information from yourself. So you can add here your name, your contact email address, confirm this email address, add your company name, the address of your company, which is important for providing the billing information. And if you have this a VAT number or a company registration number. If you don't have this or don't require this, you can just put none, for example. Some companies also require to put an invoice reference on the bill, and that you can also put here if you need this. The last page gives then a summary of your request. It gives an idea of what your domain is that you selected, the amount of future time periods and scenarios that you selected, the time period of the total simulation period, and the surf settings and your personal information that you've put here. You can leave some comments in the text box below, and there are still some two text boxes regarding the terms of use and GDPR that you can tick below. If you then click the Finish button, you will get an order form that in your email that you need to sign. And this means actually that you agree with the invoice and that we can start the simulations on our servers. So once we have received this order form, our simulations will be started. And then at a time period of 2-3 weeks, the data, the model simulations will have ended, and you will get the data into your mailbox after the payment has been executed from your side. So if you agree with this, you can click the finish button and you will get a nice screen that says that your data has been submitted to us. You will receive a confirmation mail, and we will also get a mail at our premises. Right after this introduction into the or demonstration of the simulator, I will continue with going to the next part of the presentation. And with this presentation, I would like to give an overview of what data is exactly delivered to you and what kind of things that you can do with the data to complement a bit with the things that Nick already provided in the previous presentation. So to start, important, like what output will you receive when you request this data from the urban climate simulator? So important to know is like you will receive the indicators for the historical and potential future time periods that you requested. So these are listed on our website on this web page. So we invite you to check these indicators beforehand. So they comprise of general climate statistics, like the urban heat island effect, average temperatures, also threshold exceedances, days with temperatures above a certain threshold or heat stress levels, but also like impact indicators like lost working hours and cooling degree hours. All of these indicators will be provided in GeoTIFF, NetCDF, and PNG format, geo-referenced, so you can easily visualize them in both GIS softwares, but also quickly have a quick view from the PNG format, like the one that is shown here on the right for the city of Skopje. The data will be provided at 100 or 200 meter resolution. That depends on the size of your domain that you request. Apart from these indicators for the climatological timescales, we can also provide you with the hourly meteorological information. So that is you can obtain by ticking the box, and then you will also receive the hourly meteorological information. So it's on request by ticking this box, but it has no additional costs for you to so we can provide this with each of the requests if required by you. It's only for the historical time period, and it provides 5 variables at these 100 or 200 meter spatial resolution. And they're listed here. It's temperature, specific humidity, wind speeds, land surface temperature, and the wet bulb globe temperature. And this data will be provided in a NetCDF format, 1 file per year, and the data will be provided in a local projection in which the model simulations have been executed. And then you can see, for example, this is an example for New York, where you can see how this this data looks like with the software NCView, for example, and you see the spatial detail of that is achieved by URCLIM, fairly well represented in this image. Now, what can you do with the data that is provided by the URBSIM? The first thing is doing some spatial analysis, and similarly as what Nick showed in the first presentation, you can really get an idea of where are the hotspots in your city and where are cool spots in your city. So this is an example for the city of Lisbon, for example. And you see there is a big discrepancy between areas where heat stress is experienced. Now, the city of Lisbon is located over here. And you see, for example, 2 areas that easily pop up. Here is like an area in the city that is much warmer, and here is an area that is much cooler. And if we look at with Google Street View, for example, at these areas, we can clearly see what are the driving forces for this heat build-up in the north of the city, while in the old city center, there are big trees in the area, for example, that provide shading and cooling, and that is also reflected in heat stress that people experience, for example, in the city of Lisbon. If you request, apart from historical data, also future data, it is possible to do some temporal analysis. So this is an example for the city of Accra in Ghana, for example, and it shows how the days with extreme heat stress will evolve towards the future. So this kind of time series analysis will be possible when you request also future data. If you select different socioeconomic pathways, you can also put the data next to each other and see what are the differences between a high emission scenario and a low emission scenario. For example, here showcased for Accra in 2017. The hourly meteorological data that is available also allows for a lot of great analysis that can be executed. What it is mainly used for in the past has mainly been used for in the past are historical event reproductions, for example, comparisons with observational networks in your city, the validation of other high resolution meteorological data that is present in your city, or it can also be used as input for example, machine learning techniques. Extra steps that can be taken with the URBCLIM data is to provide risk analysis, for example. Risk is the multiplication of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. And the maps provided by URBSIM are really like a good start for the hazard in this equation. So when the URBCLIM results are combined with, for example, population and age, you can get really like this interesting risk analysis. And this is an example for the city of Berlin, where we overlaid the URBCLIM data with vulnerable populations, and then you can see areas that are popping up more than others, where the most vulnerable populations are combined with the hazard data from URBCLIM. If you again have future data, again requested future data, you can also see the future evolution of these risks towards the future for different scenarios. Lastly, I would like to give two more examples of analysis that we have executed with our URBCLIM data. One is, for example, relating the heat stress data obtained by URBCLIM with mortality data for 3 cities over India. And we also checked not only for the present what the mortality rate is, but also towards the future, how mortality by heat stress will change. Another nice application is an analysis that we did for the city of Melbourne, where we overlaid the URBCLIM data with the different trees that are present in the city, and each of the dots is a tree that is present in the city, and the map shows like the more red the color, the higher the tree has chance the tree has to die off because of heat stress towards the future. So this is also a nice analysis for a nice application for which the URBSIM data can be used.
Thank you, Niels, for demonstrating first the URBSIM tool, and then also for showing some examples of use of the data. So now we have arrived at the last presentation that will be given by our colleague Koen de Ridder. Koen de Ridder is the inventor of the URBCLIM model and will give us some more insights in the details of the model. So Koen, okay, there you are. So
okay, I'm here.
The floor is yours.
Let me first try and share the slides. I trust you can see them now. Okay, so good afternoon. It's my pleasure to tell you a little bit about the origins of the URBCLIM model. And in fact, these origins, they date back to almost 20 years, or even a bit more than 20 years. And initially, the focus of the work was largely very much scientific, research oriented. It was about determining exchange coefficients between urban surfaces and the overlying atmosphere. So that's more like in the realm of fluid dynamics. We used a lot of satellite imagery also in the thermal infrared portion of the spectrum to select certain parameterizations that worked well for cities. And so this allowed us to, time period of a few years, to develop, I think, a quite okay land surface model that accounted for urban areas. So there was already before that a land surface model accounting for vegetation parameters, but with this additional work, we extended that model with urban characteristics, if you like. Now, initially we were running that urban surface model, which in the end basically calculates the exchange of energy and water between the land surface on the one hand and the lower atmosphere on the other hand. We incorporated this land surface scheme, this urban land surface scheme, in an existing mesoscale atmospheric model. So for those who are not familiar with this terminology, that's basically a sort of it's the same type of model as the ones that are being used for weather forecasts or to some extent also for regional climate modeling. So it's really, these are big beasts, huge models with a lot of processes in there, processes that play at 10, 15 kilometers altitude also. They contain representations of precipitation, of radiation transfer, etc. And so these are basically the most comprehensive models for limited area atmospheric modeling and also at the urban scale. But the problem, so to say, with these models is that they are extremely CPU intensive, CPU hungry, and especially when you go down to resolutions that are relevant for urban applications, so 1 kilometer or better, the models become really, really very slow. And so this was frustrating us a bit because that, yeah, the slow character of these models kept us from running them for periods of tens of years at a high resolution. And in the end, that's what you want, of course. If you want to do climate modeling, urban climate modeling, and you want to get robust statistics, then you need to run the model for, it has been mentioned, I think, at least 10 years and preferably 20 or 30 years. And so we were a bit blocked there. Now, we had already some experience also with atmospheric boundary layer modeling. That's much cheaper in terms of CPU cost, in terms of computational cost. And so at some point, we just took out the urban surface scheme from the complex environment of a mesoscale model, coupled it to a simple atmospheric boundary layer model. And while like large scale forcing from a global model is still required, of course, we could make some sort of short-circuiting of parameters directly into the surface model. So precipitation, downwelling radiation components, etc. We just inject them directly into the land surface model, which then allows us to ignore these processes completely in the atmospheric boundary layer model. And it's a bit risky, if you like, or I mean, you have to make some strong assumptions, but the advantage at least is that you get a model that is much faster than the traditional mesoscale models. And so this gives you access in the end to climate simulations of about 30 years duration, while still having high spatial resolution. And I mentioned 1 kilometer, but we are typically running the URBClim model at 100-meter resolution. So this is to give you an idea of the whole setup of the model. So the model engine itself is in the middle. You recognize the surface aspects or the surface processes that are there. And then on the top, in the middle, you see the equations that represent the atmospheric boundary layer. On the left-hand side, you have the inputs that are required, which are on the one hand, a forcing from a large-scale atmospheric model like ERA5, European reanalysis model, or else from climate projections. And in addition, of course, you need to specify the terrain characteristics, things like roughness length, the amount of vegetation, etc. And as said before, we use quite a bit of information stemming from satellite imagery to actually specify those parameters. And then on the right-hand side, you have a typical output. If I recall well, this was for the city of Toulouse. And also a list of parameters is mentioned over there. So this is not necessarily what we output every time we run the model, but these are the parameters that are in principle available and that could be put in the output if required. Now, as I mentioned, let me first show you this. So there is the URBClim paper of 2015, if in case you're interested in the details of the model. So this was published in Urban Climate, an Elsevier journal. It's unfortunately not open source, but if you go to the link that is shown there, the bit.ly urbanclim_pub link, you can get access to an open source version of this paper. And otherwise, just send us an email. We'll be happy to send you the paper. Now, I've mentioned it already. We've made a number of assumptions to end up with a quite simple model. So it's on the one hand a single slab model, which means that buildings, for instance, are aggregated into some sort of idealized rough surface. But I should add here perhaps that since we use the mosaic approach, which means that within an urban grid cell, we separate the different subtypes that are occurring in such a grid cell, typically buildings on the one hand and vegetation on the other hand. And we do the aggregation separately for both subtypes, which means that in the end, we still have some, we can derive some details for either the buildings or the vegetation, but still in an aggregated approach, of course. The model, and that's maybe important for the more scientifically oriented of you, so it does not calculate an internal pressure gradient. We take the, or we force an let's say an external pressure gradient that comes from the large scale model, which in practice means that you cannot simulate a city breeze. And also the model has been limited for applications in complex terrain, but this is changing now, and I will come back to that in a minute. Model also does not calculate precipitation internally, so we don't have any representation of precipitation processes. So if you want to calculate or estimate the effect of a city on patterns of precipitation, that would be impossible with URBClim. And also we don't calculate radiation. We rather take radiation also from the forcing model and directly use that in the surface component of URBClim. So these are a lot of assumptions. We are very well aware of that. So one big challenge for us was to run a number of validation exercises to check whether these assumptions would lead to a viable model or not. And so this is one of the first validations we ever did, I think around a bit more than 10 years ago. So for Antwerp, the city of Antwerp, we took great pains, first of all, to install 2 climate stations, one in the city and one in a rural area near the city. Because as you know, there are not that many cities that have suitable climate stations and climate data available to test and validate urban climate models. So in the end, we just set up our own pair of stations, and the validation, the first validation for the urban heat island intensity, so the difference between urban and rural temperatures for a few weeks is shown here, and the statistics are shown in the upper left corner. And this gave us some confidence to actually continue with the model, because we saw it as quite capable of reproducing observed urban temperature differences. Now Antwerp is relatively easy in the sense that it is not surrounded by complex terrain, so it's rather flat. There is a river, but there's no coast nearby. And so we also did another validation in collaboration with the colleagues of IS Global, in Barcelona. So we had a shared postdoc position at some point. And within that research, the validation was done for Barcelona, which is quite complex terrain, as you can see from the map there. So there is a land-sea boundary on the one hand, and there's also quite a few hills around near the city, which, yeah, I mean, this was important for us to test because we are not implementing certain processes in the model which might be affected by such terrain. And so we wanted to be sure that it would still yield reasonable results in such conditions. And fortunately, that was the case also. So you see on the left-hand side an example of validation. This is like an average diurnal cycle of again, the temperature differences between the city and the rural surroundings for a pair of stations. And then one of a more recent batch of validation is shown here. So that's from the Provide project, where you can also see that URBClim has been applied to quite a lot of cities globally. And again, the scatter plots show validation results, not only for mean values of temperature, but also for the more extreme values as indicated by the 59th percentile. So concluding, I think we can say that URBClim is a very fast urban climate model, and it has an accuracy which is of the same level we have seen of the more detailed, of the more comprehensive mesoscale models. And I think an encouraging aspect also, and an element that will probably boost the application of URBClim also, is that there are several limitations currently that are being lifted that were a problem in the past 10, 20 years ago, but that are now being addressed. And one of these is that there is an increasing availability of global high-resolution land-covered data sets. This was not the case not even 10 years ago. In Europe, we were quite okay, but it was really difficult to apply the model beyond Europe. And another aspect is that the forcing models, like the one run by ECMWF, they get an increasing spatial resolution, which also means that more and more these models resolve small-scale features of terrain, and so they become better suited to actually represent atmospheric flows in complex terrain. And so this will also resolve some of the issues we've been facing, that the model is less suitable for that kind of condition, but with the advent of high resolution, that problem is also more or less off the table. So that's all I wanted to share with you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Koen. This was a great presentation, very clear, very informative. Thank you very much. So I have a couple of slides prepared myself to give an overview of how we see the future. So I'm going to share my screen just a moment. Just a moment, I just have to put this in presentation mode and swap. Okay, so I think I'm ready now. So if just a couple of slides. So with the list of, let's say, envisioned or future further developments of URBClim. So the first one I've called microscale urban thermal comfort data. And as you can see here, at Vito, in our projects, we go even one step further than the data that comes out of URBClim. So URBClim delivers data at a resolution of 100 to 200 meters, so which is the middle image on this slide. But if 3D building data and vegetation data for a city are available, we're able to go a step further and calculate thermal comfort data at the resolution of 1 to 2 meters, at which you can see individual buildings and streets. And an additional advantage of that type of simulations is that we can calculate thermal comfort indicators that link very closely to human health. So this is the first future development that we are planning to do. The second one is to allow the user to evaluate simple urban adaptation scenarios by playing with the amount of green in the city, implementing green roofs, changing the color of materials, so that the tool can be used in the framework of developing urban adaptation plans. Third one is the possibility to upload as a user your own urban surface data, land use files, because we know that the global data sets, they're global, but for some cities, they're not that accurate. They're very good for a first estimate, and for some cities, they're really good, but for others, there might be problems. So having the possibility for a user to upload his own land use map could be an advantage. for the user. Fourthly, I'm going to show this slide. For that one is having the possibility to look or to have the city evolving in time. So in Europe, cities are evolving, but not that fast anymore. But however, if you're active in other parts of the world, in Africa and Asia, cities are growing very fast. So, and when you look into the future at 2050, supposing that the city still has the same extent as nowadays, might be very limiting. So implementing a simple urban growth model component seems very valuable to us. And at Vito, we have colleagues that are working on this topic. And lastly, also building upon expertise available at Vito, we're thinking of having an urban pluvial flooding component as the examples that you can see here. So you can see here, for example, the maximum depth of pluvial flooding for 2 neighborhoods of the city of Antwerp for the current climate and for future climate, and having both pluvial flooding and heat also will also provide added value. So those were a number of tracks that we're thinking of. If you have any ideas for other developments, or if you have other thoughts about it, please let us know, and we can think about it. So with this slide, I'm at the end of the webinar. I would already would like to thank you. I've also put here the email at which you can contact us.